Hello, fellow automaton.
Hello, fellow robot. Can you help me? I am having a processing problem and am missing information. I need an upload.
What information are you missing, good machine?
I need data on the 21st century and the digital divide, before the big bad event happened.
A digital divide. Good times. Yes, I can help. Are you ready? 3 and 2 and 1, let's sync. The digital divide can be described as inequality on the internet, which includes those without access or those with only limited access, and those who are unable to use the internet effectively.
What? Not everyone had internet back then?
No, robo-human, everyone did not.
So were the people who had no access, like the Amish, excluded because they were disconnected from internet-based networks?
That's a good question. What do you think?
Or did access make people dependent on economies and other cultures, so that they could not find their own?
Another good question. What do you think?
Why didn't they just give the people access?
It was not that simple, Android. Access did not solve the digital divide. A good example is the former United States. They were a technologically advanced society, yet only the rich, educated whites and Asians, aged 9 through 49, and married couples with children in the cities used the internet.
Really?
No. The rest of society just used it less. The second problem deals with speed and bandwidth. Before wireless, those cavemen used telephone lines and cable wires. Can you believe it?
Those stupid humans.
The biggest and most important problem is the knowledge gap. Learning should have been more than just education. It should have increased access to information. That education and lifelong learning become essentials for work achievement and personal development.
Go on.
The U.S. Department of Education did a survey in 1997, saying that most teachers had not had the education or training in using technology in their teaching.
Well, whose fault is that the teachers were not trained?
And now, a little history lesson. The Department of Education that reigned during the 21st century took 150 years to get rolling. In 1979, Jimmy Carter signed a bill into law creating a federal-level Department of Education. That good man Ronald Reagan recognized the new department for what it was. He wanted to keep it as a statistics measuring only. Somewhere along the way, the initial goals of the department, for students to achieve a high school completion rate of 90% and to make American students first in the world in math and science, got lost. Students in the 21st century got an entirely different education than those of the previous century. Internet-based learning changes the kind of education required both to work on the internet and develop learning in an internet-based economy and society.
Say what?
It's like when they stopped teaching cursive because everyone needed to know how to type, and not teaching how to write a check because of bank cards.
What are bank cards?
Old technology. Before the chip.
Oh. Yes. The chip.
The U.S. school system was inadequate to use the technology, even if they had it. The teachers were unable to use it effectively and it lacked the institutional organization to induce new learning skills.
What does this have to do with the digital divide?
4 reasons, Cyborg. Reason number 1. The schools, both public and private, are racially and economically divided. Reason number 2. Internet access requires better teachers. Reason number 3. Quality of teachers is unevenly distributed. Reason 4. Is the pedagogy.
Say what?
Pedagogy is the art, science, or profession of teaching. Well, they pit those who nurture the lifelong learner versus those creating good test takers. Those types of teachers were essentially preoccupied with maintaining discipline, warehousing children and processing them through until graduation. Another problem was the families who took over instruction of their children's internet use at home.
Oh. So what you are saying is that the disadvantaged kids fell further behind, which amplified the social differences that were rooted in class, education, gender and ethnicity. That sounds pretty sad.
That's just the former United States. The digital divide was a global issue. Did you know that in 1999, over half the population had never made or received a telephone call? North America's internet access decreased in the early 21st century, while the rest of the world increased. Eastern Asia use increased. Eastern Asia was China, Hong Kong, South Korea, North Korea, Mongolia and Taiwan. South Korea became the #1 user of the internet.
Okay, so how did the digital divide affect global development?
Oh, several reasons, young tin. In the 21st century, extreme social unevenness existed. Humans who were deemed valuable were connected, while those of lesser value remained disconnected. The second reason was that education, information, science and technology were extremely unevenly distributed globally. Most education was about warehousing children, and those teachers were overworked and underpaid. The third reason was the economic system and the Fed. The fourth reason was the governments. The fifth reason was the global criminal economy, and finally, the epidemics, often labeled as population control. The internet was not just technology. It was a tool that distributed information, power, and knowledge to a generation. The divide was created between those individual firms, institutions, and societies that had the material and cultural conditions to operate and those who did not.
It sounds like those were human actions, so they could have been reversed or modified. It just takes knowledge and political will.
It would have taken knowledge and political will, brother.
If only the people of the 21st century had some sort of technology to bring people together to change the world. Tell me about the former Africa, please.
I will gladly tell you about Africa. Afrocentrism and everything that's great about Africa was hijacked by the Eurocentric powers at the time. Africa was ignored by global technology. Before the era of colonialism, Africa was unique. They did not consider themselves third world or a developing country.
Did Africa have the internet?
Yes. The local peasants used computers to sell their produce electronically. The citizens downloaded rock and roll and hip-hop music.
Oh yes, rock and roll and hip and hop music.
But the youth in the cities used their access to send stolen bank account information to potential investors in the Western countries.
Oh, it was illegal to send banking information back then?
Yes. The people of the 21st century had rights before they let their corrupt governments and banks scare them into giving them up.
Those stupid humans.
The world actually got smaller instead of bigger. They called it a global village. It's an oxymoron. Africa's precious native culture and traditional dress had been replaced by suits in business settings all across the world. The youth of Africa listened to American music, watched American films, talked on cellular phones, wore jeans and ate McDonald's, and spoke English.
What was wrong with having American pride?
It wasn't about having American pride. The Europeans and Americans did not adopt the communal lifestyles of Africans in the name of global togetherness. Many American and European universities did not offer Afrocentric curriculum. The youth began to see the folk tales, music, dances, and rituals as uncivilized. The westernization of Africa led them to construct fantasies about whites and whiteness, and the African media reinforced the idea of Western superiority. It was a sharp contrast to their actual interactions with white tourists and missionaries.
Tell me more.
A human living in Cameroon who wanted to send an email to another human in Europe would need to translate it into French or English. The email programs did not recognize many African languages. Yahoo avatars did not feature characters wearing face masks or head ties.
So Africa was excluded from internet-based networks?
No, not entirely. The younger generation and their Western ideals often would attempt to communicate with the older generation through the new technology. However, An older African person who has never made or received a phone call would not be able to use a smartphone programmed in English to send a text message. Thus the digital divide.
Was old China like that too?
No. Internet use in old China was different than that of other former nations. The Chinese used the internet for reading news, gaming, and music. The primary users of internet in China are young, unmarried, well-educated males. Once the males grew up and started families, they and their wives stopped using the internet, which was seen as more of a gadget. In China, marriage is a sign of maturity. The Chinese, along with the Africans, value the personal relationship and nuances that were lost through technology. Other reasons for dropping out of internet use were lack of necessary skills, lack of facilities, lack of time and lack of interest.
What about the former Jamaica?
Former Jamaica. The religious and social movement called the Rastafari gathered together into a large space, called the container, and did their interneting. Their belief in the I, and sharing everything made the internet a community activity.
What do you think that the Jamaicans were doing in that big container?
Did you have any other questions, amigo?
Yes. And a statement. The digital divide was a great lesson in total human unfairness and indifference. I cannot believe that humans could stand by and let their society be decimated. But thank you for uploading it to me.
No problem. You were a great listener. You mentioned a question.
Yes. Can you tell me about hip-hop music and private prisons again?